Imagine waking up tomorrow morning.
Right.
You stretch, you reach for your phone, and you look at the screen, and the text is it's just shapes.
Meaningless squiggles, yeah.
Exactly, just meaningless squiggles. So you try to ask someone what's going on, but when you open your mouth, the sounds you make have absolutely no meaning.
It's terrifying to even think about.
Right. You haven't forgotten how to speak exactly, but the bridge in your brain between a thought and a shared symbol has simply vanished.
And that means the entire concept of language speaking, writing, understanding symbols is just gone. It's completely closed.
It's a wild premise, and today we are doing a deep dive into an incredible piece of speculative fiction by Max and Claude. It's titled After the Last Word.txt.
Yeah, and the mission of our deep dive today is to really explore this profound thought experiment. We want to look at what would actually happen to humanity if we suddenly lost the ability to use language.
And probably even more importantly, what would happen if we were forced to consciously choose how we communicate moving forward?
Exactly. That choice is the crux of the whole thing.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. For you listening, imagine your brain's operating system just had its communication software uninstalled overnight.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because you can still feel, you can still think, you can perceive the physical world around you perfectly fine. But you cannot translate any of your internal experience into a shared symbol.
No pointing, no sign language, no spoken words.
Nothing. You are totally 100% trapped inside your own intention.
And the story drops us right into the perspective of a woman named Ela. She finds herself in this highly unique, isolated position following this global event.
She's an archivist, right?
Yeah, she's an archivist, and she becomes what the text calls the last reader. So while the rest of the world has completely lost the neurological ability to decode symbols into meaning, Ela mysteriously retains the ability to read.
Oh, wow. So she's the only one.
The only one. She can't write and she can't speak, but when she looks at written text, it still blooms into meaning in her mind.
That sounds incredibly lonely, actually.
It really is. And through her journey, the story examines this brilliant tension. It asks, is language a tool that connects us to the world? Or is it actually a prison that separates us from direct, unfiltered experience?
We really get to see exactly how terrifying that disconnection is right at the beginning. The story reveals that 317 days prior, this mysterious voice spoke a single, unrememberable word.
They refer to it as the closing word.
The closing word, yeah. And instantly, what the text calls semantic collapse just rolled across the globe.
This brutal scene.
It is. Ela remembers being in the archives with his junior cataloger named Marin when it hit. Marin grabs her, eyes just wide with absolute terror.
She's mouthing these desperate foams, trying to communicate.
Yeah, these urgent, meaningless sounds, but nothing transfers. And the text describes it not just as quiet, but as empty, panicked breath. Like the intention is there, but the vehicle to carry it is just completely destroyed.
And, society crumbles in a matter of hours. The text explores the immediate logistical nightmare of it all. Money becomes instantly useless.
Oh, of course, because you can't assign value without language.
Exactly. You cannot negotiate a price, you can't establish a trade, or, verify a contract. The bustling commercial districts just turn into these galleries of meaningless, colorful logos.
So what does Ela do?
Well, trapped as this living archive, she starts digging through the forbidden collection in her library. She's trying to figure out the mechanics of what actually happened.
Right, because she's the only one who can still read the old research.
Exactly. And she discovers this banned text by a philosopher named Cale Vorsant. It's called The Doctrine of Final Utterance.
Which is such a cool title, by the way. And Vorsant has this fascinating, albeit pretty extreme theory.
Very extreme.
Yeah, he argued that language is basically the blade by which we sever ourselves from the whole of reality. That every single word we use acts as a boundary.
It's a heavy concept to wrap your head around.
It is. But think about it like this. When you name a tree, you categorize it. You immediately separate it from the forest. And more importantly, you separate yourself from the raw sensory experience of that specific tree.
Right, because you stop seeing the specific ridges of the bark or the exact shade of the leaves.
You just file it away in your brain under the generic label tree.
And Vorsant believed that true, unmediated connection to reality only exists in the space before language.
The raw experience.
Exactly. But here's the crazy part. Ela discovers that a researcher named Vasari actually took this philosophical concept literally.
This is where it goes off the rails.
Vasari managed to locate this ancient, almost mythic closing word and intentionally broadcast it to end language altogether.
Yeah.
Vasari's stated goal was to, quote-unquote, liberate humanity from the cognitive filter of words.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, but also, kind of infuriating. I have to push back on Vasari's whole justification here.
Oh, absolutely. It's highly controversial.
Right, because isn't the ability to share complex, abstract thought exactly what makes us human?
That's the argument, yeah.
Vasari deciding to just mute the entire planet and force everyone into their own isolated sensory bubbles, it feels less like a liberation and more like, I don't know, the ultimate act of arrogant censorship.
They played God, basically.
Yeah. Vasari essentially decided they knew better than 8 billion other people.
Well, to understand Vasari's logic, we have to look at the assumption they were making. Vasari truly believed that returning humanity to a pre-linguistic state was universally beneficial.
Beneficial, wow.
Yeah. They thought that removing the veil of words would force people to be truly present with one another. But, as you pointed out, that assumption highlights a massive ethical blind spot.
Because it completely ignores the trauma.
Exactly. Vasari completely ignored the trauma inflicted on people who fundamentally relied on that linguistic structure just to exist.
And if Vasari thought forcing everyone into silence would instantly create this, enlightened utopia, they were completely wrong.
Utterly wrong. The reality was much messier.
Yeah. As Ila leaves the ruined city and journeys north toward the Monastery of Silence, she's trying to track down Vasari. Right, we see how wildly different the reactions to this forced silence actually are.
It's a real spectrum of experiences.
On one hand, you have this profound, devastating tragedy. The text describes a woman Ila sees sitting at her window every single day, just crying endlessly.
That part was heartbreaking.
It really was. This woman didn't just use words, she lived in them. Her entire consciousness was structured by her internal monologue.
So to lose that is to lose yourself.
Right. To be cut off from language was to be cut off from her own identity. People were literally dying of semantic collapse, just drying up from the inside out because their brains needed associative meaning the way a physical body needs water.
But then you have to contrast that tragic deterioration with the people who actually thrive in the aftermath.
Right, because it wasn't all bad for everyone.
No, it wasn't. As Ila travels, she encounters individuals who have adapted in deeply moving ways. Like in a town called Millbrook, she meets a woman who has developed a profound vocabulary built entirely on physical gesture.
Just sheer physical presence.
Exactly. At one point, Ila is just totally overwhelmed by the psychological burden of carrying the knowledge of the old world. And the woman from Millbrook doesn't need to ask what's wrong. She simply steps forward and places her hand over Ila's heart.
The text spends so much time on that single gesture, it transfers the emotional weight completely, without a single syllable.
It's a beautiful moment.
And then shortly after, Ila meets Drum. He's this young man navigating the mountain passes, and he communicates entirely through rhythm.
Right, he taps on a small drum he carries.
Yeah, he uses tempo and syncopation to convey these really complex emotional states. And for him, the loss of words wasn't a deprivation at all. It was a relief.
He finds immense grounding peace in the absence of all that chaotic verbal noise.
So what does this all mean? It sounds like Vasari forced half the world into a traumatic sensory deprivation tank, while the other half got this, permanent Zen retreat.
That's a really good analogy, actually.
How does Ila process carrying the weight of being the absolute only one who can still read this landscape?
Well, she's constantly analyzing these contrasting experiences. She begins to realize that her own position as the last reader makes her essentially obsolete architecture.
Obsolete architecture, wow.
Yeah. She's a structure built for a function decoding symbols that simply no longer exists in the world around her. She's constantly narrating her own thoughts in an environment that has fundamentally moved on.
That's got to be exhausting.
Oh, for sure. But observing Drum teaches her something vital that shifts her entire perspective. Silence, she realizes, is not just an absence of words.
It's not an empty room.
Exactly. It's a profound, heavy presence of its own. It's a completely different operating system for consciousness.
Okay, but if silence is this heavy, valid presence, like she learns from Drum, how does she reconcile that with Vasari's destructive actions? What happens when she finally reaches the Monastery of Silence and actually confronts the person responsible for all of this?
You'd think there'd be some remorse.
Right. She walks in expecting Vasari to see the suffering and apologize, but Vasari is completely unrepentant.
They don't care at all.
Not at all. Vasari looks at Ela and basically says, "You're still trapped in the prison of language. I set the rest of us free."
But, the confrontation with Vasari is almost secondary to the world-shattering discovery Ela makes deep inside the monastery's architecture.
A secret room.
Yes. She finds a hidden, acoustically sealed chamber. It was prepared long before the semantic collapse hit, specifically designed to preserve an environment where language still functioned.
And who's in there?
Inside this room is an elderly linguist named Saren. And Saren reveals the mechanical truth behind the broadcast.
Which is huge.
It changes everything.
Yeah.
Saren explains that if a linguistic structure like the closing word exists to shut down the brain's semantic pathways, then mathematically there must be a parallel structure.
An opening word.
An opening word, exactly.
But the opening word doesn't just hit an undo button, right? It's not this magic reset switch that suddenly forces everyone to start talking again.
No, not at all. Saren explains that it works differently on a neurological level. The opening word acts as a bypass switch.
Okay, a bypass switch.
Yeah. It offers a new parallel circuit in the brain that people can choose to engage. It returns language, but strictly as a choice.
That is such a crucial distinction.
It is. Saren describes the opening word as a specific phonetic structure that begins in silence, moves through sound, and ends in silence. It requires the speaker to physically hold both states.
And Ela realizes that she has to be the one to deploy it.
She's the only one who can.
So she walks out of the monastery to this hillside overlooking a vast valley. She rings a silver bell to mark the exact moment in time, and she speaks the opening word. And the text provides this incredibly vivid description. The closing word, which she had been carrying like a weight in her chest for nearly a year, just merges with the opening word in her throat.
It's the climax of her personal journey.
Totally. And think about the magnitude of what she just did. She hands the entire world a master key to their own locked minds. But, I have to ask, doesn't handing that key back just immediately restart all the old problems?
You would think so, yeah.
Why does Ela believe that giving people a choice won't just instantly devolve into the same chaotic, noisy world that Vasari tried to destroy in the first place?
Because Ela comes to understand that a living archive, humanity itself, must be allowed to change. You cannot freeze human development.
Right. You can't just pause the species.
Exactly. By giving language back to a world that has now spent nearly a year steeped in profound forced silence, the foundational context of communication has irrevocably shifted.
They're not the same people anymore.
Exactly. The people of this world can never unlearn the silence. They have felt its weight. So they now possess the memory and the contrast necessary to use language intentionally, rather than just compulsively filling the air.
That makes a lot of sense.
Saren reminds her that choice is the fundamental freedom of consciousness, existing even before words. So Ela is not forcing a system onto them. She's returning their agency.
But the reality of returning that agency is incredibly messy. As we move into the aftermath of the opening word, society immediately splinters. It fractures into these wildly different factions.
It's chaos.
It is. Think about your own neighborhood right now. If half your street truly believed that spoken language was a toxic corruption of the mind, and the other half believed that silence was a primitive, regressive insult, how long before you start building fences?
Probably not very long at all.
Exactly. And that is exactly what happens in the town of Split River.
Yeah, Split River becomes the physical manifestation of this ideological divide. The town is literally divided by a river. On the north bank, you have the pure speakers.
And they hate the silence.
They despise it. They view the silence as an animalistic regression, and they absolutely refuse to interact with anyone who won't vocalize. Then, on the south bank, you have the pure silence.
Who feel the exact opposite.
Right. Having experienced the profound presence of a quiet mind, they view the return of language as an irredeemable corruption. And the hostility between the two banks is just intense and volatile.
And it gets so deeply personal, too. The text introduces us to a man named Venn in a town called Ashford. Venn is a highly charismatic speaker, but his crusade against silence comes from a place of pure, unresolved grief.
His story is so tragic.
It's gut-wrenching. His 7-year-old daughter was one of the tragic casualties of the initial semantic collapse. When the closing word hit, her developing mind just couldn't handle the sudden loss of structure, and she was permanently mentally lost to it.
Even after the opening word.
Yeah. Even when Ela spoke the opening word and returned the choice, the little girl didn't come back. So Venn turns his immense grief into political fury. He actively argues that silence is an existential threat to civilization itself.
And, Ven's argument forces the reader to confront the logistical nightmare of a fractured society. He asks, how do you maintain an electrical grid or run a complex medical facility if the engineers and surgeons refuse to use the same mode of communication?
Honestly, I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't Venn kind of right about the logistics?
From a purely practical standpoint?
Yeah,
What?
like how can you possibly have a functioning large-scale civilization without a shared communication standard? It feels like Ela handing out the choice to speak just created tribalism on steroids.
That's a fair point. But to understand why Ven's demand for mandatory speech is dangerous, you have to look at the trauma experienced by the pure silence.
Right, their perspective is valid too.
Very valid. For many of them, language was the tool historically used to wage wars, to draft deceptive contracts, to manipulate and oppress. They view returning to mandatory speech as voluntarily drinking poison.
Wow, voluntarily drinking poison.
Yeah. The text really illustrates that choice without wisdom absolutely creates new forms of bondage. Freedom is chaotic. But enforcing a single standard, as Venn wants, would just be repeating Vasari's mistake of arrogant censorship, just from the opposite direction.
Which brings us to the communities that actually figure out how to navigate this mess, the integrators. I love the descriptions of these towns. Take Weaver's Cross.
Weaver's Cross is fascinating.
It's so cool. The entire town is geographically divided into quadrants. Speech, silence, mixed, and rotating. If you step into the silent quadrant, you are bound by social contract to stop vocalizing.
And they teach their children to transition fluidly between these modes using specific physical rituals.
Yes, the children playing tag in Weaver's Cross is such a brilliant detail.
It really is.
The rules of the game dictate that you can only be tagged if you are currently in the same communication mode as the person chasing you.
So a speaking child cannot tag a silent child.
Right. It trains them from birth to read the room, to constantly evaluate the mode of their peers, and to seamlessly switch back and forth.
We also see Singing Hills, where the community bypasses the binary entirely. They invent a totally new hybrid mode. Song speech.
Song speech. That sounds beautiful.
It is. They use complex melodies and sustained tones to convey the emotional depth that standard words alone cannot hold.
So Ela observes all of this, all the splintering and adaptation, and she realizes that her job didn't end when she rang that silver bell on the hillside. Giving people freedom was just the first step.
The real work is what comes next.
Right, the massive societal negotiation that has to follow.
And that negotiation culminates in the formation of the Great Council. 500 representatives from across the fractured landscape gather in the capital. They're trying to forge a path forward that prevents society from tearing itself apart in a civil war.
It's a high-stakes meeting.
Very high stakes. You have the pure speakers demanding universal laws and standardized trade languages. And you have the pure silence demanding absolute regional autonomy and freedom from linguistic contracts.
Basically, nobody agrees on anything.
Right. The early days of the council are described as being on the verge of total collapse.
Until Ela uses her authority as the last reader to change the entire format of the gathering. Instead of letting them debate rigid laws, she forces the 500 representatives to spend 3 full days doing nothing but listening.
No proposals, no arguments.
None, just witnessing each other's stories of survival. And on the third day, the most pivotal moment of this entire deep dive occurs. A young man named Kel stands up. He represents a community that calls themselves Threshold.
Threshold is a really unique community. It's composed entirely of people whose communication abilities were permanently damaged or fragmented by the sheer neurological trauma of the closing and opening words.
The collateral damage, basically.
Exactly. These are people who want to speak but physically cannot form the words, or people whose language comes out scrambles and nonlinear. Kale stands before the council and points out a glaring flaw in their entire debate.
What does he say?
He tells them that arguing over the right to choose speech or silence operates on the privileged assumption that you have the capacity to choose it all.
This shifts the entire paradigm. It's like society was spending all its energy arguing over whether every business should run on Macs or PCs, and Threshold stands up in the back of the room and says, hey, some of us don't have electricity.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. You are arguing over a binary that doesn't even apply to us. You need to build a system that accommodates the broken, the non-standard, and the spaces in between.
They force the council to look past the pure ideologies.
And it works. The breakthrough introduced by Threshold completely dismantles the idea of universal law.
The council stops trying to mandate a single unified system. Yeah.
Instead, they begin creating what they call frameworks for diversity.
Right. Which means developing highly adaptable tools for society. They establish trade protocols that rely on physical exchange or complex visual symbols rather than just spoken contracts.
They get creative?
Very creative. They even train a new class of conflict resolution mediators. These people are experts in reading microexpressions and body language just as accurately as they read spoken arguments.
It's during this whole process of building these frameworks that Ela has her ultimate defining revelation. She realizes that silence is not just an alternative option on a menu next to speech.
It's not a binary choice.
No,
Yeah.
silence is not the opposite of speech. Silence is the soil from which genuine speech must grow.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
Isn't it? If you root your words in that quiet, grounded presence, you communicate in a fundamentally different way than if you're just nervously filling the empty air with noise.
And this profound understanding leads directly to the formation of the Bridgewalker Corps.
The Bridgewalkers, tell us about them.
The story concludes with Ela and her colleagues at the council training, a specialized cohort of students. These students are not just taught to be bilingual in speech and silence.
It goes deeper than that?
Much deeper. They're trained to endure the intense, visceral discomfort of moving between the different communities. They train the pure speakers to sit in terrifying, unmediated silence until they find comfort in it.
Wow.
And they train the pure silence to endure the clumsy, restrictive nature of spoken words without retreating. The goal of a bridgewalker isn't just the mastery of a communication skill. It is a fundamental transformation of the self.
They learn to physically and mentally hold the tension of opposites. They basically become the translation layer for a fractured world.
It's incredibly powerful.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Because this speculative story isn't really about a magical broadcast that uninstalls language.
No, it's an allegory.
Exactly. It's a profound, incredibly sharp lens on how we communicate in our reality today. Think about the words you use every day. Do you use them to genuinely bridge the gap between yourself and the people around you?
Or do you use language to build walls?
Right. To obscure what you really feel and to avoid the vulnerability of true presence.
It forces us to examine our own habits. I mean, in our incredibly noisy, hyper-connected modern world, have we entirely forgotten the baseline of silence?
I think many of us have, yeah.
Have we forgotten that opening our mouths to communicate should be a deliberate choice, rather than just a compulsive reflex to avoid quiet? Consider Ela's revelation about the soil and the tree.
What a question to ponder. What if, starting today, you treated your own words not as an automatic default setting, but as a deliberate action?
An action that emerges thoughtfully from a foundation of quiet.
Try it. Imagine uninstalling that automatic communication software in your brain just for a moment today. Let the silence sit there. Feel its heavy, valid presence. And then, only when you are truly ready to connect, consciously choose to open language again. Thank you for exploring this fascinating thought experiment with us. Take a moment today to find the space between your words.